I'm Evelyn Blackwood, and for 32 years, I lived in the shadow of my father, Captain Silas Blackwood, the legendary fisherman of Seabrook Cove. While he built boats and commanded crews, I painted storms and clung to light. I thought moving across the country, building an art gallery, even founding a nonprofit might someday earn his approval. But when I returned home for his memorial, everything changed, because he wasn't dead. He was waiting to humiliate me in front of an entire town. But what he didn't expect was that my husband would stand up and expose every secret he tried to bury. That night didn't break me. It set me free. Before I share the full story, drop a comment to tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever carried the weight of a parent's silence, hit like and subscribe. You're not alone, and maybe, like me, you're ready to let go. In Seabrook Cove, Maine, life had always revolved around the sea, steady, cold, and unforgiving. My father, Captain Silas Blackwood, commanded the oldest and most respected fishing fleet in town, Blackwood Fisheries. His name carried weight, dependable, unflinching, the spine of the whole community. To the town, he was a man of stature. To us, he was carved from stone, unyielding, with little patience for deviation. My brother Leo was his mirror image, broad-shouldered, sure-footed on the docks, echoing that deep, commanding laugh. My mother, Martha, played the quiet role, ever-present but unknowable, like a tide you never quite predicted. From the outside, they were picture-perfect. Inside that weathered cliffside home, love wore boots and measured success in boats and bounty, not warmth. As for me, I was the misfit. While my family read waves and winds, I saw colors, shadows, and light. Even as a child, I retreated into my sketchbooks, drawing the wildness of the coast, the storm-bent trees, the restless sea, the lighthouse clinging to the edge of the world. I still see my father's face when I told him I wanted to go to art school. His expression, cold as January ice. Art, he scoffed. Childish nonsense. Try putting that on a table and feeding a family. He wasn't angry, just deeply, thoroughly unimpressed. Legacy isn't made with finger paint, Evelyn. When he refused to pay for what he called a fantasy degree, I scraped together what I could, grants, dishwashing shifts, anything, to get myself to the Rhode Island School of Design. And though I left the coast behind, I carried his disapproval like a stone in my pocket. 15 years passed, more silence than words. A card here, an email there, barely more than obligation. Leo would call now and then, usually to pass on news from the docks, or toss out a surface-level check-in. Never real talk. My cousin Laura, the golden child turned Boston attorney, would send perfectly punctuated texts every few months, as polished and remote as ever. She, like Leo, fit neatly into the mold my father so admired, driven, conventional, successful. I built a different life, far from Seabrook, in Portland, Oregon. I opened a cozy gallery that showcased regional artists and pieces that stirred the soul. I met Mark, a gentle, bright-eyed software engineer who didn't just love my art. He loved me. Fully, patiently, without condition. In that life, I found color again. Then, just 2 months ago, everything shifted. Leo called, his voice thick with emotion. "Evelyn, it's Dad. He's gone. Heart attack. Memorial's next week." And just like that, the man who had seemed immortal, unyielding and immovable, was gone. I felt a strange wave of grief, not just for the man he was, but for the closeness we never had, the apology I never received, the acceptance I never earned. Mark held me as I sobbed, not just for a lost father, but for the chapters left unwritten. "You don't have to go," he murmured, warm hand on my back. But something inside me needed to. Not for him, maybe not even for me, but for the silence that deserved to be broken. The flight back to Maine felt surreal. As the plane descended, the scent of pine and salt water met me like a ghost from the past. Driving down the winding coastline towards Seabrook Cove, I felt like I was being pulled into an old version of myself, one I thought I'd left behind. Mark reached across the seat, gently taking my hand. "Whatever happens," he said, "you are already enough. You are already loved." I nodded, trying to let his words sink in, but deep down, a quiet part of me still wondered, still longed, for something I never had. Maybe even now, I hoped my father had seen me. If only once. The old community hall hadn't changed much, its weathered beams and creaky floorboards still holding decades of memories. But today, it was packed tight with familiar faces, all draped in black and gray, their expressions a mix of wind-worn stoicism and freshly carved grief. Maybe 70, 80 people, neighbors, old rivals, and longtime loyalists, had gathered beneath the out-of-place crystal chandeliers that spilled a soft golden haze over the room. At the entrance stood Leo, upright and composed, receiving condolences like a prince ascending the throne. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Evelyn," he said, his tone flat. "More observation than welcome. Didn't think you'd come." He gave Mark a handshake that was more formality than connection, then turned seamlessly back to a man beside him. "This is my sister Evelyn, and her husband," he added without inflection, as though we were guests at a stranger's funeral. Leo launched straight into a well-rehearsed tale of Dad's final fishing trip, his greatest catch, his enduring command at sea, his voice rising just enough to draw a crowd. Mark glanced at me, silently offering comfort as we edged away. At the front of the room, near the urn that bore my father's ashes, I found my mother. She looked smaller somehow, wrapped in a deep blue shawl that had seen too many winters. Her arms opened as I approached, and she held me close. She smelled of lavender and time gone by. "My dear girl," she whispered into my hair, her voice as brittle as sea glass. "You came." Her eyes, so often unreadable, shimmered now with something between relief and regret. A few steps away, Laura, perfect Laura, stood surrounded by admirers, recounting some high-profile court win with crisp confidence. When she noticed me, her painted smile barely shifted. "Evelyn," she said with a tilt of her head, "you look well-fed." The insult was as smooth as her pearls. Around us, the elite of Seabrook Cove mingled like royalty, old fishermen who'd traded nets for investments, polished officials whose families had run this coast for generations. Every conversation spun the same tired themes: market prices, storm damage, dwindling lobster counts. When the speeches began, a hush fell. One by one, speakers took the stage, weaving tales of Captain Silas Blackwood. His grit, his unwavering discipline, his unmatched commitment to Seabrook Cove. Leo's turn came, and he didn't miss a beat. He spoke with polish and poise, drawing subtle lines between admiration for our father and confidence in himself. It was less a eulogy and more a passing of the torch, as if he were already writing his own legend in the margins of Dad's story. Then came Martha Blackwood, my mother, stepping forward, her hands shaking slightly, but her voice gaining clarity with every word. She spoke of lean years and long nights, of the strength it took to build a family alongside a man as demanding as Silas. Silas always said, she paused, her voice growing stronger, that his true legacy wasn't the boats or the business, it was the people he left behind. My heart clenched. This was it. This could be the moment. Maybe, just maybe, she'd look my way. A nod, a word, anything. But instead, her gaze slid naturally, almost instinctively, to Leo. "And Leo," she said, her voice swelling with emotion, "has not only honored his father's memory, he's surpassed it. He is the future of Blackwood fisheries." The room erupted into applause, loud and hearty, pride radiated off her. And just like that, I vanished again. I sat frozen in my seat, each word hanging heavy in the air. His legacy, his vision, as if I were never part of the story at all. A chill moved across my back as the applause softened and the murmur of voices returned. I glanced up. My mother was looking at me now, her expression unreadable, layered with something I couldn't name. Was it pity? Guilt? I didn't know. And then, slicing through the quiet, came a sound I thought I'd never hear again. A voice, not just familiar, but impossible. "Thank you all for coming," the voice boomed, clear as a bell. "But the real reason we're gathered here today isn't what you think." My stomach dropped. I knew that voice. I'd grown up flinching beneath it. It was my father, Silas Blackwood. He emerged slowly from the shadows near the back of the hall, his figure gaunt but unmistakable. Silas Blackwood, very much alive. The breath caught in my throat. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a sudden squall. Aunt Clara clutched her pearls, her face pale. Leo staggered a step back, the color draining from his face as realization settled like a stone. The father he'd buried in speeches and tears was standing right in front of him. And me? I sat motionless, stunned, as if time had warped. Then his eyes, cold and sharp as a winter tide, found mine across the stunned gathering. "You can leave now, Evelyn," he said, the words falling like ice. "This doesn't involve you." It wasn't just a dismissal. It was a public stripping of identity, of worth. Shame surged in my chest, burning. I started to rise, my hands trembling. But Mark was already on his feet beside me, his presence firm, his hand steady at the small of my back. "Sit down, son," Silas ordered, turning his sharp tone to Mark. "This isn't your place either." The crowd watched, tense and silent. But Mark didn't budge. He squared his shoulders and locked eyes with the man who had never seen me. Then, with slow purpose, he reached for a water glass and a spoon. The soft, deliberate chime, ping, ping, cut through the silence like a bell at sea. All eyes turned. The room froze. Silas's face reddened with fury. "What do you think you're doing?" he snapped, his voice like a snapped rope. But Mark didn't even flinch. He waited for full silence, then raised his glass slightly. "I'd like to offer a toast," he said, his voice calm, clear. "To the woman Silas Blackwood never had the eyes to truly see, and to the truth that's been buried far too long." Another wave of shocked whispers filled the air. Silas surged forward, livid. "That's enough. Security will have you out of here in minutes." Mark met his anger with quiet resolve. "Please," he replied, voice still even. "By all means have me removed, but I wonder how the Seabrook Daily News would cover the story. Captain Silas Blackwood, alive and well, faking his death to humiliate his only daughter, only to be exposed by her husband at his own memorial?" The words hit like a cannon blast. Silas froze. His eyes flicked around the room, judging who was listening, who was believing. 3 weeks ago, Mark continued, stepping forward just slightly, Evelyn received a strange, unsigned message. It said, "Ask about the starfish. Ask about the storm of AI. He didn't die." The room seemed to lean in. The starfish, as many of you know, was Silas's pride, his first major boat, his claim to fame. And the storm of 08, not everyone made it back, but someone never left to begin with. He paused, then added, "What Silas never acknowledged is that Evelyn runs a thriving art gallery in Portland. But more than that, she founded Seabrook Artists United, a nonprofit that's quietly supported over 500 children in crisis across rural Maine through art therapy and community exhibits." A stunned silence spread through the hall. I felt removed, as if watching a scene on a screen. My life, my efforts, finally spoken aloud, finally seen. Mark stood tall beside me, his voice unwavering. While Leo was building up the fleet and shaking hands with investors, he said, his tone sharpening, "It was Evelyn who cared for Martha, your wife, when she was recovering from her stroke 3 years ago. Evelyn, who painted with her, read to her, kept her spirits alive when you were too busy chasing your next big deal. But I suppose caregiving doesn't make headlines in the fishing trade, does it?" The tension in the room grew unbearable, and then Mark turned toward Leo. "And you, Leo," he said quietly, "you remember where the down payment for the Mariner came from, don't you?" Leo looked stricken. His lips parted, but no sound came. "It didn't come from a bank," Mark said, more softly now. "It came from Evelyn. She sold her very first painting, Coastal Solitude, the one she made of the lighthouse when she was a little girl, to help you when your business dreams nearly collapsed." My breath caught in my throat. That had been a quiet moment between siblings, a rare flicker of closeness. I never told anyone. I never needed recognition. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing it held up as something good, something real, felt like warmth returning to a frozen place inside me. Leo couldn't meet my eyes. His shoulders sagged under the weight of truth. "For 32 years, Silas," Mark said, turning fully to face my father, "you've told Evelyn she wasn't enough. Too soft, too creative, too different from the blueprint you drew. You rationed love like it was earned through obedience, and you treated approval like a paycheck she kept failing to cash. And now, here you are, having staged your own death just to shame her in front of the very people whose opinion you seem to prize more than your own daughter. His voice cut through the silence. You didn't just break her heart tonight. You dragged an entire town through a grief that wasn't even real. He turned his attention to the stunned faces around us, his voice steady and unwavering. Here's what you should all remember. Real family doesn't keep score. It doesn't require resumes or rituals. Love, the kind that matters, doesn't hinge on matching job titles or carrying on the legacy. Real family shows up. Real family stays, even when things get messy, especially when they do. A murmur passed through the room like wind across a still pond. I sat still, unable to breathe, watching a truth I'd long buried rise to the surface. You don't have the right to say these things, my father barked suddenly, his composure cracking. Not in front of my colleagues, not in front of my friends. You don't know a thing about our family, his voice echoed with the bluster of a man used to being feared. Mark didn't flinch. I know more than enough, he replied calmly, because a man who fakes his own death to humiliate his child isn't leaving behind a legacy. He's revealing a bankruptcy of character. And I know the Starfish, your prized boat, didn't just go under in the storm of '08. The Coast Guard report that year was doctored. That insurance payout? It launched your second fleet, didn't it? The silence that followed was deafening, glasses untouched, breaths held, reality dawning. A low sound rumbled from Silas's chest, a furious growl. Then he stepped forward. But Leo, his face pale and unreadable, finally moved. Without a word, he stepped in front of our father, blocking his path with quiet finality. That single action shifted something in the air. Mark looked at me then, and his eyes softened with pride. Evelyn is the strongest person I've ever known, he said gently, his voice now just loud enough to carry. Not because she ever met her father's impossible standards, but because she survived them and still became someone worth knowing. Then he raised his glass again, tilting it toward Silas. So thank you, Silas Blackwood, for teaching us exactly what kind of parent we'll never become, and for proving once and for all that no storm stays buried forever. The Coast Guard has reopened the Starfish case, by the way. Seems they got an anonymous tip. He set the glass down quietly, the sound crisp against the wood, and reached for my hand. That simple gesture steadied me. As we began walking toward the exit, it felt like a tether had been cut. No one moved to follow, no one dared to speak. The silence that wrapped the room was thick, almost reverent, as though everyone felt the weight of what had just happened but couldn't name it. We had just reached the doors when my father's voice rose behind us, this time high-pitched, frantic. If you leave now, don't come back. You're cut off, both of you. But we didn't pause. We didn't even look back. Mark's grip never wavered as we stepped beyond the final row of chairs. Just before reaching the threshold, an elderly cousin, someone I barely remembered, caught my eye. She gave me a small, solemn nod. It was nothing grand, but in that moment, it was everything. Maybe a blessing. Maybe a quiet apology from someone who finally saw me. The doors shut behind us, sealing off the eruption of voices that finally burst inside the hall. Outside, the valet approached without a word, clearly having heard enough through the walls to know something massive had shifted. The night air struck my face like water from a cold spring. Jarring, yes, but cleansing. I closed my eyes and let the wind clear what it could. "Are you okay?" Mark asked softly once we were in the car, the interior dark and still. "No," I whispered, "but maybe I will be." It was the truest thing I could say. I was cracked open, humiliated, exposed. But something deep inside had finally broken loose. The tension that had defined me since childhood now lay in pieces. When we reached home, I barely made it through the door before collapsing onto the couch. The dam inside me ruptured. I sobbed harder than I ever had. Loud, aching, heaving sobs that shook me to my bones. Mark didn't say a word. He simply held me, his arms strong and steady, his shirt soaking with tears I didn't know I'd kept. "I'm sorry," I choked out. "I'm so sorry you had to do that." Mark brushed my hair back gently. "I'm not," he said without hesitation. "I've wanted to say those things for a long time." "He'll never forgive us," I said, the child in me still reaching for hope, even in rejection. Mark's reply was low, certain. That's not something worth having, Evelyn. We stayed up well past 3, talking through every moment, every wound. The shock faded slowly, giving way to a strange mixture of loss and freedom. Do you think I went too far? Mark asked quietly as we finally prepared for bed. Doubt seeping into his voice for the first time. You stood up for me, I said, when no one else ever did, not even me. Sleep came in patches, interrupted by buzzing calls. Between midnight and dawn, my father rang 7 times, each voicemail angrier than the last, filled with demands, insults, threats. I didn't answer a single one. I just watched the glow of the screen light the room like distant lightning, each buzz fainter than the last. By morning, the silence was broken by a new message. Laura. Of course you had to make it about you. Dad's memorial was supposed to be his day. You and Mark ruined everything. I stared at her words, a perfect example of how warped their world had become. In her mind, I wasn't a victim. I was the spectacle. But at 10:17 a.m., the real twist came. Leo called. I almost didn't pick up, but I did. That was some scene last night, he said flatly. I didn't plan it, I said, my voice cool. A pause. What Mark said, about the money for the Mariner, is that true? Yes. Another long pause. Why didn't you ever throw that in my face? Even when I treated you like less. Because I didn't help you to gain something, I said quietly. I helped you because you were my brother. There was silence again. Then Leo's voice came, low and almost fragile. I never thanked you, and I should have. It's okay. Maybe it's not, he murmured. What Dad did last night, and about the starfish, it wasn't right. He always said he did everything for the family, but it was never about us. It was always about him. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't nothing. It was the closest we'd been in years. Back at the gallery, Sarah took one look at me and gently steered me into her office. You look like you've been through a hurricane, she said, pouring me a strong cup of coffee. I'm fine, I lied. Just family stuff. Evelyn, she said, voice firm but kind. If you broke your leg, you'd take time off to heal. Well, your father just broke something else. And that kind of damage deserves recovery too. I reluctantly agreed to take 3 days. I spent them in a fog, crying, spacing out, binge-watching shows I couldn't remember afterward. Mark stayed close, giving me space but never letting me drift too far. Outside, life carried on as though nothing had happened. But inside, something had ended and something else had just begun. On Thursday morning, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Aunt Clara on the other side, clutching a thick manila envelope like it might bite. Her usual certainty had vanished, replaced by hesitation. May I come in? She asked, her voice brittle. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She perched stiffly on our couch, declining coffee, tea, or comfort of any kind. Her spine remained rigid, like this was a courtroom rather than a home. What my brother did was unforgivable, she began, without ceremony. I should have spoken up that night, but I didn't. And I've been excusing Silas for years, brushing off his cruelty as just how he is. She handed me the envelope. Inside were photographs I had never seen, my mother, radiant and expectant. A toddler version of me, balanced on my father's shoulders. Both of us caught mid-laugh. Another of him patiently showing me how to bait a line during a family trip I couldn't remember. He wasn't always like this, Aunt Clara said quietly. After the starfish, after what really happened, something inside him fractured. He became obsessed with control, structure, results, legacy. If he could keep the world perfectly arranged, maybe he thought he could keep tragedy from striking again. He buried the truth of what happened, and over time, he buried himself along with it. I stared at the images, these strangers frozen in warmth and light, and felt no recognition. That doesn't excuse what he became, I said. No, she agreed, her eyes heavy. It doesn't. But I thought you deserved to know that there was once a version of Silas who loved you freely, without metrics or disappointment. That capacity lived in him, even if it got buried under bitterness and fear. After she left, I tucked the envelope into my desk drawer. I couldn't bear to look at it again, at least not yet, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away either. In the days that followed, our fractured family reeled. Texts came from cousins I hadn't heard from in years. A few expressed sympathy. Others asked for details like it was a scandal unfolding in real time. Even my father's sister-in-law called to say she'd always thought he was far too hard on me. The family narrative was shifting, years of mythology being rewritten under pressure. 5 days after that surreal, disastrous memorial, my father's name lit up my phone screen. The moment I saw it, my chest clenched so tightly I dropped to the floor, unable to breathe. Mark knelt beside me, coaching me through each breath until I could sit upright again. That night, he did what I hadn't found the strength to do. He researched therapists who specialized in emotional abuse and generational trauma. "You don't have to keep carrying this alone," he said gently, showing me a short list. "You need someone trained to help you heal from this." I chose Dr. Eleanor Vance. Her photograph showed a woman with kind eyes and a steel trace of wisdom behind them. She looked like someone who didn't flinch. My first session was scheduled for the following Tuesday. The night before, I curled into Mark and whispered, "What if therapy breaks me entirely? What if I find out I'm even more broken than I feared?" "You're not broken, Evelyn," he said, pulling me close. "You're hurting. There's a difference. And sometimes, healing means letting things break open first." Exactly a week after the memorial spectacle, my father appeared unannounced at our building. The doorman called up, his voice uncertain. "Mr. Silas Blackwood is here. Should I send him away?" My hand hovered near the intercom. "It's your call," Mark said quietly beside me. "No," I said after a moment. "Let's finish this." He entered our apartment with his usual presence, but it had shrunk. He seemed smaller, less certain, stripped of the command he once wore like a uniform. He glanced around our modest home with barely concealed distaste. "I've come to clear the air," he said flatly. "That performance at my memorial was unacceptable. The Coast Guard is investigating now. That's your fault." "You faked your death," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "You humiliated me." "What exactly did you expect?" "I expected loyalty," he snapped. "Instead, your husband hijacked the moment and destroyed my reputation, my standing, my legacy." Mark stayed quiet as promised, his calm presence like a lighthouse in the storm. "Did you come to apologize?" I asked. My father blinked, genuinely baffled. "Apologize? For what? Being honest about my disappointment? I gave you every chance to make something of yourself. You threw it all away for painting." And in that moment, the truth Mark had tried to help me see for years fell into place with perfect clarity. My father never saw me, only the outline of the daughter he'd wanted, never the one he had. "I think you should leave," I said softly. "I'm not finished," he barked. "I've spoken to my attorney. If you and your husband don't issue a formal apology and help me smooth this over with the authorities, you'll both be cut out of the will, entirely. Do you understand?" The old me would have folded, would have begged. But here, standing in my own home, with my husband at my side and a life I'd built with love and integrity around me, I felt a steel in my spine. "We don't want your money," I said. "We never did. All I ever wanted was your love. But I won't keep chasing something that should have been freely given." And about the starfish, may the Coast Guard find every single truth you buried. His face hardened like granite. "You'll regret this. When the bills pile up and your little art hobby crumbles, you'll remember this day." "I respect myself now," I said. "That's more than you've ever taught me to do." He stormed out, slamming the door with enough force to shake the walls. A picture fell to the floor, its frame cracking. It was one from our wedding, Mark and I laughing as we fed each other cake. I knelt down and picked it up, peeling away the broken glass. "Symbolic," I murmured. "What is?" Mark asked, crouching beside me. "Only the frame broke," I said. "We're still whole." He helped me gather the shards. We never spoke of my father again that night. Instead, we ordered Thai food, opened a bottle of red, and talked about whether it might be time to move, maybe further down the coast, to someplace quieter where the air didn't carry the weight of old wounds. The idea sat gently in my chest, like something worth believing in. As I drifted to sleep, I realized something small but profound. I hadn't apologized for a single thing all day. Not for existing. Not for feeling. Not even for standing my ground. It was a tiny victory, yes, but for someone like me, it felt like the start of something whole. "Tell me about your father," Dr. Eleanor Vance said during our first session. The words unlocked something. For the next 50 minutes, I spoke without filter, stories I'd never shared aloud, not even with Mark. Dr. Vance listened intently, her expression unreadable but warm, her pen moving only occasionally. As the clock ran out, she looked at me with quiet care. "Evelyn, has anyone ever talked to you about emotional abuse or narcissistic behavior patterns?" That single question cracked the surface. Over the next 3 months, we dug into the bedrock. My family's silent contracts, my father's conditional love, my siblings' enabling roles. We unpacked my own survival strategies, people-pleasing, overachievement, emotional withdrawal, that once protected me but now kept me small. Healing isn't a straight path, Dr. Vance cautioned. Some days, the old pain will sound louder than the new truth. That's normal. She was right. Some mornings, I woke convinced I was broken beyond repair. A harsh word from a client could send me spiraling. Some nights, I still reached for my phone, half hoping for a message from the man who taught me love was earned. The panic attacks continued, triggered sometimes by memories, sometimes by nothing at all. One particularly intense episode left me gasping on the kitchen floor, Mark beside me with his hand on my back, steady and calm. Afterward, Dr. Vance gently suggested medication. "It's not forever," she said. "Just a tool while your nervous system learns safety." Within weeks of starting a low-dose anti-anxiety med, the edges of fear dulled. Sleep came without bargaining. I laughed more with Mark. I stopped bracing myself in conversations. I began to feel possible again. Meanwhile, Mark and I dove into researching smaller coastal towns across Maine. The idea of rebuilding somewhere quieter, somewhere not stained by my family name, appealed more with each passing week. We made spreadsheets, comparing towns, real estate prices, potential gallery spaces. "Are we running away?" I asked him one night. "No," he said simply. "We're running towards something better." That sentiment solidified when Mark landed an unexpected offer from a tech firm in Bar Harbor. The role came with a raise and remote flexibility, 3 days at home, creative work, and a chance to contribute to local innovation. "It's like the universe just greenlit our exit," he said, holding up the offer email. We gave ourselves 6 months, time to transition the gallery, tie up loose ends in Portland, and begin again intentionally. I was updating Sarah, my manager, on our tentative timeline when she stiffened, eyes widening. "Evelyn Taylor," came a voice behind me, followed by a whiff of expensive perfume. I turned to see a woman in tailored navy and pearls. "I'm Eleanor Finch. I was your father's executive assistant at Blackwood Fisheries for 15 years. My stomach clenched. "If my father sent you," I began. "He didn't," she said, cutting me off. "He has no idea I'm here. I retired last month. He can't fire me now." She glanced around. Could we speak somewhere private? Over coffee in a quiet corner cafe, Eleanor Finch unraveled truths I'd only guessed at. My father's tyranny hadn't been reserved for family. He'd ruled his business with the same iron control, particularly cruel to younger staff, especially women. She recounted how he berated interns, stole credit from subordinates, and held petty grudges for years. "The night of that memorial," she said, voice low, 3 separate people told me they'd always felt he treated you unfairly. And your husband's speech? It struck a chord. Silas has many admirers, but just as many survivors. I stared at her. "Why are you telling me this now?" She stirred her coffee slowly. "Because I watched you bend yourself in half, trying to meet expectations no one could ever satisfy. I watched you shrink to earn love." And I said nothing. For 15 years, I watched. I can't undo that. But I'm done being silent. She touched my hand briefly, her fingers cool and firm. "And I'm not the only one who spoke to the Coast Guard." That conversation felt like oxygen, unexpected validation that I hadn't imagined. The coldness, the manipulations, the subtle erasures. It gave me new resolve. In the following weeks, I began reaching out to cousins on my mother's side, long silent since her stroke. To my surprise, many responded warmly. Aunt Beatrice, my mother's older sister, invited Mark and me for a weekend in Vermont. There, in her sunlit sitting room, she handed me a worn leather journal. "She kept these in college," she said gently. "Your mother was an artist, Evelyn. She painted, sketched, even submitted work to galleries. But when she married your father, she slowly let it all go. His ambitions became hers. His priorities erased her own." I sat flipping through pages filled with pressed leaves, watercolor margins, and notes about color theory and grief and light. I felt tears burn behind my eyes. For so long, I believed my creativity had made me an outlier, something random, misplaced. But now, holding my mother's words, I saw it differently. This wasn't rebellion. This was inheritance. I wasn't alone in my passion. I was her continuation. Months after the so-called memorial, I stood behind a podium at a small literary event, speaking about Seabrook Artists United's mission to elevate voices that too often went unheard. Midway through my speech, a realization struck. I was speaking freely. No second-guessing, no internal edits with every sentence. I wasn't navigating my father's imagined disapproval like a minefield. Even when I stumbled over an artist's name, I didn't flinch. I just kept going. "You were magnificent," Mark said later that evening, clinking glasses with me as we celebrated among fellow artists and publishing colleagues. I laughed, a little breathless. I didn't picture his face, not even once. For years, his scowl had hovered over every stage, every spotlight. But that night, it was simply gone. In my next therapy session, Dr. Vance smiled gently. "That's a breakthrough," she said. "You're finally internalizing a new voice. Yours, and it's speaking louder than his ever did." Our Bar Harbor plans were moving from dream to reality. A weekend of house hunting brought us to a weathered but charming Victorian with a converted carriage house, perfect for a combined studio and gallery. It felt right immediately. We put down a deposit, and suddenly our fresh start wasn't just emotional. It was geographical, physical, real. Back in Portland, I expanded Seabrook Artists United, launching a new imprint focused on memoirs about family healing and emotional survival. The project lit something in me. For the first time, my past wasn't just something I was running from, it was fuel. Meanwhile, my relationship with Leo continued to slowly thaw. He called now and then, and the conversation started inching away from shallow updates. One evening, his voice quieter than usual, he admitted, "That night, Dad's memorial, it made me look at things I didn't want to. I've lived my whole life chasing his approval, and I didn't even know what for." He paused. He confessed it, by the way, about the starfish. Said it was necessary, said he did it for the family. The words sat heavy between us, but something about his honesty made the air feel clearer. Laura, on the other hand, stayed rooted firmly in my father's camp. A formal wedding invitation arrived addressed to Mark only, with a sticky note affixed. "No drama, please." We responded just as formally, with a polite declination and a generous gift from their registry. No message, no drama. No. 6 months after the night that turned our family inside out, Mark and I began talking about starting one of our own. I'd always dodged the idea, haunted by the fear that I'd pass down my father's wounds, his rigidity, his inability to love without condition. "What if I'm like him?" I asked one night, my voice barely a whisper. "What if I hurt a child the way he hurt me?" Mark didn't hesitate. "The fact that you're even asking means you won't be. You're aware, you're breaking the cycle. That's the difference." I wanted to believe him, and deep down, I did. That same week, in therapy, I crossed a line I'd tiptoed around for years. Rage. Not softened, not explained away, just raw, burning anger. Dr. Vance guided me through writing a letter I'd never send. A letter that held no forgiveness, no polite disclaimers. "I hate what you did to me," I wrote, the words scratching deep into the page. "I hate that you made me feel like a burden. I hate that, even now, part of me still longs for your approval." I wrote until my hand cramped and the paper tore in places. And when I was done, I felt lighter. After that, something shifted. I noticed it gradually, days passing without his voice in my head. Weeks without him taking up space in my dreams or decisions. His absence had transformed. It was no longer a wound, no longer bleeding. It had become something quieter, something settled, just a fact. In our final week in Portland, an unexpected email arrived from Eleanor Finch, my father's former executive assistant. "I'm retiring to Bar Harbor next month," she wrote. After our last conversation, Silas and I had a falling out over the testimony he gave the Coast Guard. It reminded me too much of how he treated you. If you and Mark are settled in, I'd love to grab coffee. Sometimes chosen family matters more than the one we're born into. I reread her message twice, feeling something like warmth stir in my chest. Quiet solidarity from an unlikely place. While packing boxes into the moving truck, I came across the envelope of photographs Aunt Clara had given me. The images didn't sting like they once did. They felt like artifacts from a story I'd read long ago, distant, softened. I tucked them beside more recent memories. Mark and me laughing on a trail in Acadia, our art booth crowded with curious visitors, snapshots from quiet dinners surrounded by friends who saw us clearly and loved us anyway. My story wasn't being erased. It was being rewritten, frame by frame. Our last night in the apartment was quiet. I stood by the window, Portland's skyline shimmering beyond the glass. Mark came up behind me, slipping his arms around my waist. "Second thoughts?" he asked gently. I shook my head. "No," I said. "Just saying goodbye to the version of me who lived here, the one who always felt like she came up short." He kissed my shoulder. "She was always enough," he whispered. She just didn't know how to believe it yet. The next morning, we headed east. The city receded behind us as coastal trees lined the winding roads. Somewhere along the drive, I realized I hadn't checked for messages from my father in over a week. There hadn't been a moment of defiance, no resolution, just a quiet letting go of a habit that had once ruled me. The ache had dulled, not because it no longer mattered, but because I did. I mattered. That truth had started to hold. Bar Harbor welcomed us with an unexpected stretch of sun-washed days. As we unpacked the last boxes, I found the cracked picture frame from the night my father stormed out. I had kept it, replaced the glass, and now I placed it gently on the mantel. "I think it belongs here," I said. A reminder of what we brought with us, and what we didn't. Mark nodded, his eyes soft. "The past shaped us," he said. "But it doesn't get to choose who we become." Exactly 1 year after my father's staged memorial, I stood in our Bar Harbor kitchen with a glass of sparkling cider in hand, watching Mark out on the deck, grilling under a sky thick with cherry blossoms. Our yard shimmered with light and laughter, neighbors, friends, and chosen family enjoying a spring afternoon. So much had changed since that bitter night in Seabrook Cove. My gallery, Evelyn's Canvas, had taken root in the community, earning recognition for our local outreach. Therapy had shifted from urgent survival to monthly check-ins. And most significantly, I was 4 months pregnant with our first child. "Need a hand?" Aunt Clara asked, stepping into the kitchen with her sleeves rolled up. Her relationship with my father had grown distant after she continued seeing me, but at 68, she'd made peace with choosing values over loyalty. I handed her a tray of appetizers. "I'm good, thank you," I smiled. And I meant it, deeply, honestly. I was good. Not perfect, not untouched by the past, but finally, peacefully, whole. The doorbell rang just as I was arranging slices of brie beside honeycomb and dried figs. When I opened the door, there was Leo, slightly travel-worn, a duffel slung over his shoulder, and a hesitant smile playing on his face. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "Flight from Boston got delayed." I stepped forward and hugged him. It still felt a little new, this version of us. Over the past year, our relationship had softened, from stiff phone calls to real conversations. He'd visited twice already, each time peeling back a few more layers of his own reckoning with Dad's legacy. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "Everyone's out back. How's Claire?" He'd recently started seeing a kindergarten teacher who seemed to calm something in him I didn't know could be calmed. "She's good," he replied, smiling. "Wanted to come, but couldn't get the time off." He paused, then pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and handed it to me. "I've gone back and forth on whether to show you this, but I think you deserve to know." Inside was a clipping from a Seabrook Cove newspaper. The grainy photo showed our father looking older, thinner. The headline read, "Silas Blackwood charged with insurance fraud. Obstruction of justice in starfish case." He's okay physically, Leo added quickly, watching my face. But it hit him hard. He's mostly alone now. Laura visits when she can. She's even representing him, which, well, you can imagine how that's going. He exhaled, heavy. He didn't want help, but after he nearly burned dinner and triggered the fire alarm, the neighbors called me. I stared at the article. My father's eyes, once so sharp and controlling, now seemed dulled by consequence. I'm sorry to hear he's struggling, I said, and I meant it. But I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with this. Leo shrugged gently. Maybe nothing. I just thought you should know. He might be facing real prison time. I nodded, folding the article in half and placing it on the counter. I would sit with it later, not today. Today was for joy, not old grief. The backyard was alive with laughter and clinking glasses. My team from Evelyn's canvas mingled with Mark's colleagues, chatting about tech and brushstrokes alike. Aunt Clara, in her element, shared gardening tips with our neighbor over lavender lemonade. Even Leo slowly relaxed, nodding thoughtfully during a conversation about narrative therapy and healing through art. It was strange, but lovely, to see him listening, even relating. As the sky turned gold, Mark tapped a spoon to his glass. The soft chime quieted the yard. 1 year ago, he said, voice steady and warm, Evelyn and I made the best decision of our lives. We moved to Bar Harbor, but the journey really began earlier, during one unforgettable night. Some of you know what I'm talking about. A few quiet laughs and knowing glances rippled through the crowd. That night could have broken us, but instead it opened the door to everything we have now. He turned to me then, eyes full of something deep and enduring. To Evelyn, who showed me that strength doesn't mean never falling. It means standing up every single time you do. And to all of you, thank you for becoming our Bar Harbor family. Thank you for seeing us, for loving us as we are. The chorus of toasts rose around me, and I raised my glass with the rest. In that moment, something long hollow inside me filled. Not with approval, not with permission, but with peace. The validation I had chased for so long had always been a mirage, just ahead, always fading. But here, in this backyard, with these people, I'd found something better. Real acceptance didn't demand I shrink. It didn't require I earn my place. It met me where I stood and welcomed me home. After the last guest waved goodbye, Leo stayed to help us tidy up, sleeves rolled and unusually comfortable in our kitchen. As he loaded the dishwasher with surprising efficiency, he paused, dish towel in hand. I have a confession, he said. I've been seeing a therapist for 8 months now. That's great, Leo, I replied, genuinely glad. It's changing how I see everything. Dad, myself, you. He leaned against the counter, the familiar tension in his shoulders softened. Did you know I was jealous of you growing up? I nearly dropped the plate I was rinsing. Jealous of me? You were the golden child. I was the obedient child, he corrected. I did everything Dad wanted and got his praise, sure. But you? You always knew who you were. You refused to bend, even when it cost you everything. I didn't have that kind of courage. We ended up talking late into the night after Mark had gone to bed. Memories were laid out like old photographs, some worn, some painful, all reframed through this new lens of honesty. When Leo finally gathered his things to leave for his hotel, he hugged me tightly. I'm sorry I wasn't a better brother, he murmured. We're writing a new story now, I said, and meant it. That's what matters. 3 days later, while browsing in a local bookstore, my phone buzzed with an unexpected message. It was from Laura, the first direct contact in months. Dad asking for you, probably nothing. Just thought you should know. I stood frozen between shelves, one hand resting instinctively on the slight curve of my belly. The old me would have jumped at the bait, convinced it was my job to heal everything. But I saw it clearly now. Laura's message wasn't a bridge, it was a transfer of weight. She wanted the burden to be mine. That evening, after a long conversation with Mark, I sent a simple reply. Thank you for letting me know. I hope he recovers well. No rush, no regrets. Not a slammed door, but no invitation either. Just a quiet boundary, drawn in peace, rather than pain. 2 weeks later, I had a chance encounter that would have shaken me in another life. While visiting a friend recovering from surgery, I turned a hospital corner and nearly collided with my father. He looked older, thinner, a subtle droop to one side of his face, evidence of the stroke Leo had mentioned. He blinked in surprise, then stiffened. "Evelyn," he said, his voice roughened with age. "Dad," I replied, surprised by my own calm. "Leo said you'd had some health issues. I hope you're doing better." He gave a clipped nod. "Just a checkup. Nothing serious." We stood there awkwardly as nurses passed around us like water flowing around stones. "You look different," he said at last. "I'm pregnant," I told him simply. "Due in November." A flicker of emotion passed through his face. Surprise, maybe something deeper, but it was gone in a blink. "I see. Congratulations." "Thank you." Another silence bloomed, thick with everything we'd never said. I realized I wasn't hoping for an apology anymore. I wasn't waiting for a scrap of tenderness. I'd let that longing go. "I should go," I said gently. "My friend's waiting." He nodded. "Give my regards to Mark." The formality of it, so sterile, so hollow, almost made me laugh. I didn't. I just nodded, turned, and walked down the corridor. What stayed with me wasn't what happened. It was what didn't. No racing pulse, no tremor in my hands, no aching hope for love from a man incapable of giving it. I had met my father as one adult meeting another, not as a child pleading to be seen. The moment didn't wound. It simply passed. "He's not going to change," I told Mark that night. Mark nodded thoughtfully. "Probably not," he said. "Are you okay with that now?" I considered it carefully. "I think I am, because I finally understand. His limitations aren't my responsibility, and they're not my fault." That autumn, as the trees around Bar Harbor blazed in crimson and gold, we prepared our home for new life. Leo visited twice more, each time bringing wildly impractical baby gifts that made me laugh. Aunt Clara sent handmade quilts and warm notes full of family gossip, including the latest, that my father had started seeing a widow from his church. Apparently, she had a high tolerance for his moods. "Good for him," I said when I heard, and I meant it. His happiness or his sorrow no longer held power over mine. In late November, after 20 long hours of labor, our daughter was born. We named her Lily Eleanor Taylor. The moment I held her, warm, impossibly small, her breath soft against my chest, I felt a love so fierce and unshakable it brought tears to my eyes. "She's perfect," Mark whispered, brushing one of her tiny fingers with awe. I gazed down at her peaceful face and made a vow I had once longed to hear. "You are enough, exactly as you are." Her value would never be measured in grades, gold stars, or approval. She would be loved for her truest self, in whatever form that unfolded. Leo arrived a week later, visibly nervous but determined. He cradled Lily like she was made of glass, his shoulders tense, his heart written across his face. "She has Mom's eyes," he murmured after a moment, gently tracing the curve of her cheek. "I thought so too," I said, quietly grateful someone else had seen the echo of our mother in her. Leo hesitated, then added, "I told Dad about her. He didn't say much, but he asked to see a photo." I nodded, feeling no surge of longing, no ache of hope. My father, once a towering figure in every chapter of my story, had become a distant footnote, present perhaps, but no longer essential. As the holidays neared, we hosted a quiet Christmas dinner for those who had become our true family. Friends from Bar Harbor, Leo and his now serious girlfriend Claire, and Aunt Clara, who arrived with cinnamon rolls and 3 kinds of jam. Our home glowed with warmth and gentle conversation. Lily was passed from lap to lap, wrapped in laughter and soft lullabies. After dinner, as we settled in for dessert, Mark raised his glass and said simply, "To family, not just the one we're born into, but the one we build through love and choice." "To family," everyone echoed, glasses clinking in a moment that shimmered with meaning. I looked around and saw people who loved me not in spite of who I was, but because of it. The truth of that moment sank into my bones. The night of my father's staged memorial, what once felt like a brutal ending, had in fact been a doorway. The final rejection hadn't broken me, it had freed me. That night, walking out with Mark, I'd taken my first step toward belonging, toward home. Later, as the laughter faded and the house quieted, Lily began to fuss. I took her to the nursery and settled into the rocking chair Mark had restored with loving care. As I nursed her, the silence wrapped around us like a blanket. I studied her perfect face, her small clenched fists relaxing, her lashes fluttering in sleep, and felt something I had never known fully until that moment: peace. "You will never have to earn my love," I whispered. "It's already yours, entirely and forever." And in that quiet promise, I understood something else. I had finally given the same gift to myself. I had stopped striving, stopped apologizing, stopped waiting for someone else's permission to feel whole. It hadn't come easily. There were jagged moments, dark nights, long reckonings. But I had walked through them. I had found my voice, and I had found my worth. I was enough. I had always been enough. Laughter floated in from the living room, light and full of life. In the quiet of the nursery, Lily's tiny hand curled tightly around my finger, her grip stronger than I expected. And in that moment, I understood. This was my legacy. Not the weight of my father's disappointment, but the promise of my daughter's future. Not a life shaped by someone else's expectations, but one I was choosing, day by day, with intention and truth. Now I want to hear from you. What's your story of finding freedom from toxic family patterns? Have you ever had someone step in and speak up for you when you couldn't? Have you found your own voice after years of silence? I'd love to hear your experience in the comments below. And if this story spoke to you, if it reminded you that healing is possible, and that you are enough just as you are, please consider subscribing or sharing it with someone who might need that same reminder. Thank you for being here, for walking alongside me in this journey. Remember, sometimes the most courageous act isn't confrontation. It's choosing to walk away from what breaks you and into the arms of what builds you, into peace, into freedom, into yourself.